Jerry Jarrett, one of the most important people, I imagine, in your professional career. I'm going to give you some bump and then I'll ask you a question. One of the greatest bookers and wrestling minds, and the final holdout of territory wrestling until selling his shares to the USWA in I've said that quite wrong. He sold his shares of USWA to Jerry Lawler, but that's a story in and of itself, in 1997, as well as the co-founder of TNA with son Jeff and Bob Ryder. Jerry, also a successful wrestler in his day and a consultant for the WWF and WCW in the 90s, has died at the age of 80 after his heart gave out while undergoing treatment for esophageal cancer, which he'd been diagnosed with a month or so earlier on February 14th, 2023. I believe the last time you saw Jerry was last year while you were filming Tales of the Territories.
Well, it's like, you're right. The last time I saw him and Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Hart and Jeff Jarrett was during the filming of the Territory show on Vice. And I live in Florida now, so I flew to Atlanta and they came and picked me up and we went to somewhere. It looked like a warehouse, but they had it set up like a little interview area. And that was the last time I saw him. He looked good to me then. Everybody looked good, actually. And then I wake up one morning and I'm hearing that Jerry Jarrett, this is just preliminary reports just on Twitter or something, that he had a heart attack. And then shortly after that, Jimmy Hart called me. And he said, I just want to tell you before you read it somewhere, because I'd already read it, but not all of it, that he said, Jerry Jarrett died this morning. And I said, I couldn't believe it. It shocked me, really, because I've known him almost 50 years, not quite 50. I'm dating myself now. And then right after that, Kevin Lawler called me and told me that he had died. And after you know somebody for such a long time and work with them and you know his family and you actually feel a part of his family. Because I worked with Jerry probably during the hottest period of Memphis in the early 80s. That's when it got hot. And I used to ride up and down the road with him a lot. And I would pick his brain and we would talk. Very intelligent man. He read a lot, because I did too. So, and he enjoyed talking to me. I enjoyed listening to him. And he had a way of booking that I learned about everything I know about booking and fans from him. And he explained to me one day basically what pro wrestling was. And I still use this to this day. He said, really, if you want to know, it's biblical. It's good versus bad. That's what it is. It's God versus the devil. And he says, when you put two guys in the ring, one has to be bad, or not necessarily bad, but the people pull against him, and one guy they want to see win. He said that's basically what booking is. You put those things together, then you do a scenario when the bad guy does something not very nice to the good guy, and the good guy, he wants to make amends. He wants to get comeuppance on his rival. And he says, and one of his other sayings was, you have to make it personal. So every time I wrestled Lawler, and we did a program, I think it was 1982, a couple of months before the Andy Kaufman angle, is where I had, and something had happened to Lawler. He broke his leg. I mean, he'd gotten hurt or something, and he was out. He was injured. But I had the title, I don't even know which one it was now, Universal or something. And I said, I heard this week that a lot of people wanted challenge for this title, and I named off a bunch of people. I named Ric Flair and the Funks and somebody else and Nick Bockwinkel and I says, and the audience it's a studio audience. While I'm talking, I just happened to, and Jerry Jarrett told me to do this. He said, right at the very end, just add Jerry Lawler's name into it. And I said, oh yeah, a name that surprised me too was Jerry Lawler. You could immediately detect a change in the temperature of the room. Now the fans, and they listen to everything, they said, whoa, Jerry Lawler versus, first time they'd ever heard it. But it kind of excited them. And so we booked a series of matches between me and Lawler. And I've said this too, it was the longest but yet shortest program, we call them programs, I've ever been in. I only wrestled him 3 times, but it took 2 months to do it because we would extend it out. So that was the only exception to to Jerry Jarrett's rule, good versus bad. He was a great booker, and he made you understand things that what you were trying to accomplish. And he didn't write things out on a piece of paper. He didn't write things out and say, here, go read this. He'd give you the bullet points of the interview, and then he'd always say, go sell some tickets. And that's what he'd tell me, and out I'd go. Guess when I would get these sometimes at TV? It was an hour-and-a-half show. 30 minutes was dedicated just to Memphis, but the hour show was what they call the bicycle tape. And it was a week late in all the other towns, like it was a week late in Nashville and Louisville and Evansville and Lexington. It just ran a week late. But Jerry Jarrett would say, here it is, go. And you'd go and you'd do the interview. And sometimes he would give you that interview. It would be like the show started at 11 and say there was 15 minutes left in the show. Sometimes he would give me that interview 15 minutes right before I went out there. He wouldn't give it to me Thursday or Friday or Saturday morning. He would wait right before I went out there and give it to me, because that's the way TV ran. Sometimes you run on the spur of the moment. But he also did the first music videos that I remember. He brought those into vogue. And he also took the camera out of the studio, and he would take it to different places, and he would shoot outside the studio. Memphis TV, and I never really got a accurate account of the fans that watched it, but hit at one time, you know how they had Dallas. Dallas was a primetime show, drew super numbers. Wrestling on Saturday morning at 11 o'clock equaled those numbers of Dallas.
And this is 11 a.m. as well.
11 a.m. in the morning, drawing prime time numbers. So for the critics out there would say, why would somebody want to watch wrestling? I don't know. Ask the people who watch wrestling, I guess, because they enjoyed it. I doubt if they want to watch something that they don't enjoy. I've had guys call me, tell me when I would do little shows that they are in the farming business. They would always get up, they would drive their tractor up to the house. They were out plowing the field, and they would drive the tractor up to the house about 10 minutes before 11 so they could get in there and watch wrestling with their kids. I've had a lot of guys tell me that they only interacted with their father while wrestling was on. That's the only thing they enjoyed together was the son, and he could have been 10 years old, 11 years old. Never really interacted with his father over football or basketball or baseball. But the interaction happened watching wrestling on Saturday morning. And I've had a lot of people write me at Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com and tell me that story. And they thank me for being a part of an entertaining show that brought their father and them closer together. Because, and we would walk around Memphis, and I've often said this, we were the most over guys in the town and somehow didn't even know it. Everybody knew us, but a lot of people wouldn't run up to us. They would point, there's Dutch, and there's Dundee, and there's Lawler, and there's Rock and Roll, and there's the Fabs, and here, and there's Jimmy Hart. But it was, and I've often said that I think Memphis TV had the greatest TV of all of them. Entertaining, because I think part of that can be attributed to Lance Russell and Dave Brown. The way they did commentary, they wouldn't get all excited and scream and holler and, oh my God. And they would just tell the story. Lance was flawless. He was, they say that Jim Ross is the best. Jim Ross is very good, but I still can't put him ahead of Lance. I just can't do it. And there was some more like Gordon Soley. He was good too. But yet Lance, I guess, because I really liked him. He was a great guy. And I remember when he died, and I had met him maybe 6 to 8 months before he passed away. He came down when WWE was in Memphis one night, and he came down to the FedEx Forum. I guess it was still called the FedEx Forum in Memphis. And I walked outside, and Lawler said, "Hey, Dutch, somebody wants to see you." And I walked over there, and there was Lance and his son. And I hugged him, and he still looked good then. And I sit and I talked to Lance. It was like home week, but it was he was really, really a good guy. Now Jerry Jarrett had the fortune to hire Lance Russell when he moved away from the old promoter called Nick Goulas. And I always heard a story that Jerry Jarrett thought that Nick Goulas had stolen money from him.
Yeah,
taken money.
I can be more specific if you like. I believe that the story goes is that Nick Goulas had at some point told Jerry Jarrett that the money that Jerry was giving Nick was going towards points in the company, so eventually become a partner in the promotion. And then after about $50,000 worth of Jerry paying Nick turned around and said, "You don't own any of this company."
Yeah,
and basically stole $50,000 off him, and that's why he chose to move. This is 77, I think.
Well, I was in the territory when that happened, and I kept hearing that Jerry Jarrett was. See, we worked the whole territory then. I mean, it still had part of Alabama in it, but Jerry was booking the big towns. He was booking Memphis and Louisville. And that's actually when he came to me and he says, "Listen, we're gonna move away from Nick. And he had already quit. He'd already given his notice and moved on. And he asked me, "Would you like to join us?" And I was thinking, not yeah, but hell yeah, because Nick had a kid, George Goulas, who had to be the stupidest son of a bitch I've ever met in my life. He was uncoordinated, and he was just kind of an asshole. So I didn't like him, didn't want to be involved in him. But Jerry Jarrett, I knew how much he knew about wrestling, and he had got Memphis up doing well, and the other towns that he had anything to do with. So I said, yeah. So what he told me, he said, before you can go with me, just give your notice to Nick, 2 weeks, so he knows he can't say that I stole a bunch of people. That's a legal thing. So I did. And then I started working for Jerry Jarrett. But he had such a way of booking his stuff. He would study it and he'd sit back and he was a reader. That's why he said it was what wrestling was it was biblical. It was good versus bad, because he would read a lot. He would read all these, like he'd read a lot about World War II and Hitler and how he controlled all those people. And I mean, he would read things you wouldn't think he would read. He liked poems. So he read a lot of poems. Now, he was not buried. I think he was cremated last week, I think. They just had a remembrance of life, I think they call it. I think they had that. We're recording this on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. They had it on a Tuesday, and it's streamed online if you want to watch it. I think it's on YouTube. And they talked to Dave Brown gave a speech, and Jeff gave a talk, and the daughter. And I felt so sorry for Jeff because he couldn't stop crying. Because Jeff and Jerry had a falling out over TNA. And they hadn't talked. About 10 years went by before they talked again. And then finally, when Jeff said, I talked to my dad, I was happy for him. Because I don't care what happens, they're still father-son. And I'm glad for Jeff. Then I called Jerry, and I stayed in contact with Jerry for years. I would just like out of the blue call him. Sometimes he'd call me just to check on me. But the last time I really sent him anything was a text, and it was about 3 weeks ago. And I told him, I said, I'm just checking on you. How you doing? It's just a text. But I said, I just want to tell you something. I said, I'm watching these shows now. And I said, I want you to know that you taught me everything I know about booking and pacing and handling angles. And I says, your stuff would still work today. I just want to tell you. And he wrote me back, and you know what he said? All he said was, I love you, Dutch. That's all he said, which was strange that he would reply back in that way. But I think a lot of times you know when you're going, or sometimes you have a feeling. And I think he had a feeling that he was going to move on, but he just wanted to tell me. And I did tell him the last time I saw him in Atlanta when we did that, the Vice show. He told me he loved me then. And I told him I loved you. You know, it's kind of strange, two guys telling each other, you know, I love you. But it was true. He was a part of my past and a part of my past. And I loved the wrestling business at that time the most I'd ever loved it. Because Jerry just didn't dictate to you. He asked you what you thought. And he said, do you think? And he would bring you in on the direction of it. And you could actually just, what do you think about this? And what do you think of it? Because he wanted that. He wanted feedback. And so finally, then he would take all that and he would put it together. Yeah, I'm really going to miss that guy. And I would have to say, I think he's probably one of the best bookers, or the best booker I've ever worked under.
I'm going to give you some early Jerry facts now, and then we'll talk about a few more things in Jerry's life, and then we will end it there. Jerry was booking wrestling events while still a teenager, apparently, before he went to college or anything like that. Jerry started in Nashville as an office assistant, then a referee, before being trained by Sailor Moran, a name I don't know. 5'8" and 175 pounds, Jerry bucked the trend of big tough guys in wrestling and debuted in 1965, but didn't wrestle frequently until 1969. His first big feud was revealing that Tojo Yamamoto was his secret mentor, which turned Tojo babyface, and those two feuded against the interns. We've already talked about this. Roy Welch, who it has been suggested was starting to deal with dementia at that time, was paranoid, suspected Jerry would steal his and Nick Gould's territory, and ordered Mario Galento to sort him out, but that didn't work out that way, and Mario lost an eye thanks to Jerry, as the story goes. I find it very interesting that Jerry was allowed to book so young. He was booking the territory, or at least certain towns, in his mid-late 20s. I mean, this has got to be almost unheard of back in the day.
Well, he was a young guy. He wasn't that much older than I was. But his mother had worked in the office of Nick Gould's. Mm-hmm. for a number of years. And Jerry grew up in the wrestling business. He grew up on the promotional side, and he knew what had to be done. So he kind of just didn't jump into it out of the blue, because he had the inside scoop with his mother. And of course, he was always around the office all that time. And I think he got a few towns because I remember he told me, he said, "Hey, let me take this town and see what I can do with it." And the town wasn't doing anything anyway. And he was already going to be there. He was probably refereeing there. And they let him take the town over, and it started doing better and doing better and doing a little better. Then they said, "Hey, can you do something to this town? Because they may have 100 people coming." So if he got it up to 200 people, he would have increased the attendance by 100%. So little by little, he proved himself. But at the same time, he was self-educating himself to the world of booking. Now, Sailor Moran, I've heard the name, I never met him, but I don't know how much training he gave Jeff. Sailor Moran, I think, was a pretty big guy.
Yeah,
so
Jerry, by the way.
What was his name?
No, you said Jeff instead of Jerry. I don't. We'll have to do some more research on him. I'm going to ask you some more questions now. Can you talk about Jerry's crappy payoffs, even when the territory was doing fantastic? Because apparently the story goes is that partly due to the payoffs, Jerry Lawler and Lance Russell both threatened to leave the territory, which led to Lawler being made a 50% partner. Is that how you remember it? Is that what happened?
Well, sometimes big sums of money can result in a little greediness, I would say. And let's say we talked about this a little earlier. The talent was supposed to get like a third of the gross, or the third of the net of the house, and say that was $10,000. Let's say I have a $30,000 house. But when you start, but there's no scale. There's no scale on what this guy is going to be paid in the first match and what this guy is going to be paid in the last match, because the number changes every week or every time you run that town. But so Jerry probably just started figuring in that this guy didn't need this and this guy didn't need that, because he may have had some things to pay for that week, and he may have taken that money. Now, if the money got down to where Lawler and Lance threatened to quit, I mean, if you're at that point, and I've heard this before, so I think that's when you said Jerry was made 50% owner.
Lawler, yeah.
I mean, Lawler was made 50% owner. I knew it happened some way, but I didn't know what happened at the first.
So thanks enormously to Jerry Jarrett's booking, Lawler's star power, and a host of undercard stars as well. Memphis did gangbuster revenue and TV ratings, coming only second, as you said, to TV soap Dallas. From the late 70s to the mid-80s, when due to the inevitable march of progress, WWF's superior presentation and production started putting everyone else out of business, and to an extent Crockett maybe as well.